Hey guys, welcome to Travel Feels. Today I'm going to tell you about how I came to the conclusion that it would be a good idea to buy a $12,000 camera. So last year, I ended up buying the Canon C300 Mark II, which is a $12,000 camera, and it was actually even a little bit more when I bought it. I was filming a lot of stuff for different agencies here in Toronto, DPing for most of the shoots, and I just needed a camera that was really gonna work for me. So I started to do my research and testing out different cameras, and I ended up coming to the conclusion that the C300 Mark II was the perfect camera for what I needed. I needed a high quality 4K camera that's really good for doc style shooting, commercials and docs, and just storytelling, but also really has a nice cinematic image. So I made a massive investment and bought a $12,000 camera. And now you might be thinking that I'm crazy. Why would you ever spend that amount of money on a camera? So I'm gonna tell you why I thought it was a good investment for me at the time. First off, I did a little comparison shootout with a couple different cameras. I filmed with the C300 Mark II, the GH4, GH5, and the Sony a7R II. Here are the results from the 4 different cameras. So as you can see, the C300 Mark II is clearly the best image out of the 4 cameras. So reason number 1 is that the image quality is just so much superior to the other cameras. You can clearly see that the GH4, GH5, and the Sony all have this green tint to them. The color science just isn't quite there. And that's one of the big reasons why I like Canon, is that their color science is just really spot on. It's really true to the eye, and it just has a really nice look to it straight out of the camera. None of these images have been manipulated other than contrast and saturation, but the colors are all straight out of camera. And no, my wife has not gained weight. She's actually pregnant. We're having a baby this summer. It's our first, so we're super excited for that. Anyways, back to the cameras. So you can clearly see that the C300 is a much better image. And one of the things that I really like about the C300 is the dynamic range it has. The C300 has about 15 stops of dynamic range, whereas the GH4 has about 12 and the Sony maybe has 13. So that's quite a bit of extra dynamic range. And if you don't know what dynamic range is, it just means it can capture a broader range of exposure values. So for example, if you're filming inside and you have a window, then you can still get some of that detail in that window and be exposed inside. Whereas on a camera like the GH4 or GH5, if you're filming inside, it's really hard to keep both exposed properly. Either the window is going to be completely blown out and indoor is going to be fine, or the inside is going to be so dark and then the outside will be exposed. So the dynamic range is a big thing for me, and it's one of the big things that makes an image look more cinematic. If the camera doesn't have very good dynamic range, there's just such a harsh, contrasty look to it, and the roll off into the highlights or into the shadows is just really drastic. It'll all of a sudden blow out. Whereas the opposite with something like film, it has a really good dynamic range. None of the digital sensors can quite compare to film yet in dynamic range, and that's one of the big characteristics of a really nice cinematic image. Having that nice big dynamic range and smooth roll off into the highlights and shadows. And you might be saying it can only shoot 4K, like my phone can even shoot 4K. But not all 4K is equal. Some 4K is much higher quality than others. For example, the quality of the Sony 4K is about 100 megabits per second. And the GH5 can actually shoot 150 megabits per second, and with a firmware it's supposed to go up a little bit higher. But the Canon C300 Mark II is at over 400 megabits per second. So that's 4 times the amount of information in the 4K codec versus, let's say, the Sony. So that's a really big deal. It's actually way higher quality 4K than something like your phone or a Sony or GH4 or GH5. Next, when you're DPing and you're on legit commercial shoots, you need some of these pro features that the C300 has. For example, things like SDI connections so that the client can be monitoring what you're shooting, or XLR audio inputs so that you can have professional audio going into your camera. And that the sound guy isn't going to have any troubles with your camera plugging into it or sending a feed into the camera or anything like that. And I love having things like built-in ND filters. I've talked about ND filters and how important they are. Well, the C300 has them built in. All you have to do is press a button and it adds or takes away ND. So it's really easy, really fast. You can use any lenses and just press that button and you have an ND filter on. It's super easy, super handy. It really helps in documentary shooting. You don't have to be adjusting the filter or changing the filter from one lens to the next. You can just swap lenses and you have your ND always on. There's a bunch of other pro features, but those are some of the big ones that are a big deal for me. Next, why didn't I buy something like the FS7, which is at least on paper an equivalent camera, but just way cheaper? Well, I used both cameras and I tested them out. And in the field, I just like the C300 way more. The usability of the C300 is just so handy. I felt like I was always battling with the FS7 with the menus and how you have to change and adjust the settings. I just didn't like it. Plus, I also think that the C300 has just a much nicer image, the color science. I just like it much better. I find that the Sony FS7 has a little bit more of a video look to it than this filmic, nice look that the C300 has. But that's just my personal opinion. Feel free to disagree there. But usability wise, the C300 is just so much better than the FS7. Yeah, we're sacrificing some of the nice slow motion features that the FS7 has, but I don't actually use slow motion that much for commercial shoots. And if you do need slow motion, usually you can have a dedicated camera for that. And don't forget, your camera doesn't have to be good for every situation. You can always rent cameras if you have a shoot that needs a specific type of camera, or this camera would just be perfect for that shoot. You can always rent even if you do own your camera. So don't think that your one camera has to fit every single project for the rest of your life. That's just not gonna happen. Another big reason for me why it made sense to put $12,000 into a camera is that I can actually make money off this camera. So when I'm DPing a commercial or any project, I have a day rate that's for my skills and my work. But now with my camera, I can add an extra rental rate that's on top of my day rate. So let's say I'm charging $700 for the shoot day, and then I'm charging $350 a day for my camera on top of that. And that's not including lenses and all sorts of other stuff like lights if I'm renting those to the production. So if I have enough shoot days, I can actually pay off my camera pretty quickly. And that's pretty decent money, $350 a day, if you have enough shoots. Now, if you don't have enough shoots to rent it out, then it might not be worth it for you to spend $12,000 on a camera. But for me, I've already paid off most of the camera, so now if I sold that camera, I would actually make money on this camera. And you do have to factor in that every camera body goes down in price as time goes on. So if you're not renting it out and making enough money from it, it might not actually make you money. But for me, it worked out pretty nicely. Another really nice bonus that I actually didn't think was going to be that big of a deal is the autofocus on the C300. The autofocus is just amazing on it. It works really well actually. It's the only camera that I've actually used autofocus on a real commercial shoot. And I can actually rely on it often, whether I'm dollying in on a face real slowly or I'm on a gimbal, I can actually use the autofocus, which is not something that you'll be able to do really on the FS7 or a lot of the other cheaper cameras, or even some of the more expensive cameras. They just don't have this feature. And even if you're not using the autofocus, the dual pixel autofocus system tells you if you're in focus. So you can choose a point and it'll tell you whether your focus is too far or too close or spot on, which can be really handy. For example, if you're doing an interview and your focus is a little bit off, you can see by how much it's off. You don't have to hunt for it going back and forth. You can just adjust slowly until it's spot on and you're good to go again. It's actually a really handy feature that I use on almost every shoot right now. So this was something that was a bit of a bonus that I wasn't really banking on, but it just ended up being something that I really like on the C300. So for me, it made sense to buy a $12,000 camera, but it probably doesn't make sense for most of you. And that's okay. I actually don't use the C300 on every shoot. On most of the travel things, for example, that I shoot, I use a smaller camera just so it's more convenient to take around. I'm gonna shoot more If I don't need that extra quality, I can really get away with something like the GH5 or the Sony a7R II, no problems, and get really nice work done still at the same time. So I'm not always using the C300, but it is really nice for those commercial shoots that I do with different agencies here in Toronto. So the lesson to be learned here is that there's a camera for every purpose. The C300 Mark II is not going to be the perfect camera for everybody, nor is it the perfect camera for me, but it was the best camera in that price range that made sense for me at the time and still does right now. But when you're buying a camera or you're doing your research, don't just look at the specs. Try out the camera, rent it for a day, take it on a shoot and see how it performs. Because a lot of times cameras on paper seem really great, and then when you take them on a shoot, you just end up hating it and it's just such a headache, which ends up hindering your shoot and you're not getting all that amazing footage that you thought you were gonna get. So whether you're looking at the GH5 or one of the Sonys or an FS7 or a C300 Mark II or a RED camera, test it out, see if it works for you. Think about what kind of projects are you shooting right now and what kind of projects do you want to be shooting in the future and what camera works best for your shooting style. For me, I love shooting cinematic documentary style stuff and the C300 Mark II was just the perfect camera at the time for me. So figure out what your shooting style is, do your research, test out some of those cameras, and then make your purchase. Don't just go out there and buy whatever the newest and best thing is out there because it might not actually be the best for you. And I want to say you do not need a $12,000 camera to make amazing films. I've seen people make really nice films on something like a Canon T3i or any one of those cheap cameras. You can get a lot done with it already. But for professional shoots where you're DPing for an agency or anything like that, you're gonna wanna use something that's a little bit better, like the C300 Mark II, but you can always rent those cameras too, so don't worry about it. You don't need a nice camera to be a legit DP. So there you have it. That's why I ended up investing $12,000 into a camera, which sounds absurd and I was a little bit scared to do it, but it worked out for me and it's really paid off. I hope you enjoyed this little video and that you learned something. Guys, enjoy the filmmaking process and go get some of those travel feels.